The South African national team sat on the floor of Johannesburg's International Airport, surrounded by duffel bags and silent mobile phones. Their flight was fueled and waiting, but the cockpit was empty of hope. Across the Atlantic, the training pitches in North America were manicured and ready. Yet the men meant to run on them were trapped by ink and bureaucracy. The 2026 World Cup had officially begun. But for the players of Bafana Bafana, the borders had already closed. This was not a mechanical failure or a scheduling oversight. It was the first visible crack in the most expensive, most expansive, and most politically volatile sporting event ever conceived. While the world watched the countdown clocks, a silent war was being waged between the host nation's immigration offices and the very concept of a global tournament. South Africa's players eventually made it to the pitch, only to be eliminated in the round of 32 by Canada. But their struggle was merely the opening act. Behind the scenes, three major powers, France, the United Kingdom, and South Africa, were beginning to pull at the threads of FIFA's grand design. They weren't just complaining about travel logistics. They were questioning the legitimacy of the host itself. The 2026 World Cup was sold as a masterpiece of unity, a three-nation collaboration between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. It was the first time the tournament would feature 48 teams, up from the traditional 32. This expansion was supposed to be a celebration of inclusion. Instead, it became a logistical nightmare that collided head-on with the cold reality of modern geopolitics. The United States, as the primary host, brought with it a complex web of immigration policies that did not care for the beautiful game. A travel ban affecting citizens of 39 different countries became a wall that no stadium could scale. Several of these nations had teams that had fought through grueling qualification cycles, only for their fans to realize they were barred from entry. It was a total system failure. The world was being stripped out of the World Cup, one denied visa at a time. This wasn't just about fans, it was about the integrity of the competition itself. A Somali referee, widely regarded as the finest official on the African continent, arrived in Miami with his credentials in hand. He had spent his life preparing for this moment, the first official from his nation to reach this level. He was turned away at the border. He was sent home without blowing a single whistle. His career milestone erased by a customs officer who didn't recognize FIFA's authority. In London, the mood shifted from concern to open hostility. Inside the House of Commons, a Conservative member of Parliament stood to address a thinning room. He wasn't talking about trade or local taxes. He was suggesting that England, Scotland, and Wales should consider a total boycott of the 2026 tournament. He framed it as a necessary pressure tactic against the current American administration. The comparison was blunt and devastating. He asked why the footballing world had been so quick to exile Russia after the invasion of Ukraine, yet remained silent as the 2026 host nation implemented policies that effectively banned participants from dozens of nations. The rhetoric didn't stop there. A formal petition from a group of UK lawmakers reached FIFA's headquarters in Zurich, demanding the United States be excluded from its own tournament. It was an unthinkable request, yet it was being debated in one of the world's oldest democracies. Across the English Channel, the French National Assembly was echoing these sentiments. A prominent member of a left-wing party stood before his peers and urged the French Football Federation to prepare for a withdrawal. He proposed a radical alternative: strip the matches from American soil and play the entire tournament exclusively across Canada and Mexico. The movement was growing. It was no longer about a few delayed flights. It was about the soul of the sport. Germany soon joined the chorus of dissent. The vice president of the German Football Federation, a man usually known for his diplomatic restraint, went on record comparing the 2026 situation to the dark days of the Cold War. He spoke of the Olympic boycotts of the 1980s, suggesting that the current threats were perhaps even more significant. He questioned whether FIFA had lost control of its own product. To understand why this was happening, you have to look at the relationship between FIFA and the American government. FIFA President Gianni Infantino had spent years cultivating a specific kind of closeness with the sitting U.S. administration. He had even gone as far as awarding the American president a specially created FIFA Peace Prize. The optics were jarring. While fans from 5 African countries were being told they had to pay a visa bond of up to $15,000 just to enter the country, the head of world football was opening a new office inside Trump Tower in New York. This bond program was a specific point of agony. Imagine being a supporter from a developing nation, having saved for 4 years to buy a ticket, only to be told you need to provide a cash deposit equivalent to a decade's salary just to prove you won't stay. FIFA eventually pressured the U.S. to suspend the bond requirement for ticket holders, but the gesture came too late. The message had been sent. Some fans were welcome, and others were a liability. The South African sports minister didn't mince words. After his team's visa chaos was finally resolved, he stated publicly that the situation had made his entire nation look foolish. He was right. The players were exhausted before they ever touched the ball. They walked into their opening match against Mexico, already drained by the stress of the previous week. It was a pattern repeated across the tournament. Journalists from Iran and various African outlets were issued single-use visas. If their assignment required them to follow a team across the border into Canada or Mexico, they were effectively stranded. They could leave the U.S., but they couldn't come back to finish their jobs. While the politicians argued over borders, a second crisis was brewing in the ticket offices. FIFA, looking to maximize revenue from this expanded format, introduced dynamic pricing for the first time in World Cup history. This is the same system used by airlines and concert promoters to hike prices as demand increases. It was a disaster for the average fan. Between October and April, ticket prices for 90% of the matches were raised. The average climb for the 3 main ticket categories was 34%. But the greed went deeper. Partway through the sales cycle, FIFA introduced premium zones within existing seating categories. Fans who had already paid thousands of dollars for what they thought were front row or prime seats were quietly moved. They were shifted to less desirable spots, sometimes behind goalposts or with obstructed views, to make room for new, higher-paying corporate clients. This wasn't just poor customer service, it was potentially illegal. Attorneys general in New York, New Jersey, California, and Texas launched formal investigations. They issued subpoenas to FIFA, looking for evidence that fans had been intentionally misled about what they were buying. The numbers were staggering. Resale prices for the final at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey hit a peak of $125,000. Even when the market cooled, the cheapest seats were still hovering around $10,000. The 2026 World Cup was on track to set an all-time attendance record, but the stands were being filled by a different kind of person. The traditional, singing, flag-waving fan was being replaced by a corporate guest who might not even know the offside rule. The stadiums were full, yet they felt empty. There were literal empty seats in the knockout rounds. Not because people didn't want to go, but because the pricing had reached a level of absurdity that even the secondary market couldn't sustain. This was the commercialization of football taken to its absolute limit. It was no longer a tournament, it was an extraction of wealth. As the knockout stages progressed toward the final on July 19th, the tension between the sport and the setting became unbearable. For the fans of Morocco who had their tickets in hand, but their visas rejected without explanation, the tournament was a ghost. For the Scottish supporters who saw their approvals revoked while they were standing in line at the airport, the World Cup was a lie. These weren't isolated incidents. They were the logical conclusion of a tournament hosted by a nation that had prioritized border security over its international obligations as a host. This wasn't a series of isolated mistakes. It was exactly how the system was designed to work. The system was designed to prioritize the relationship between the governing body and the host government over the fans and the players. FIFA had traded the inclusivity of the World Cup for a foothold in the American market and a suite of offices in Manhattan. They had allowed the host to dictate who could attend and who could work, effectively surrendering the world in their own name. The resistance from the UK, France, and South Africa wasn't just about 2026. It was a warning shot for 2030 and beyond. The 2030 World Cup is scheduled to be held across Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. It is another multi-continent experiment. The precedent being set now in the United States is terrifying for those who believe football belongs to everyone. If a host nation can decide to bar certain referees, journalists, and fans based on their passport, then the World Cup ceases to be a neutral territory. It becomes a political tool. The politicians in Paris and London saw this clearly. They understood that if they didn't push back now, the tournament would forever be a hostage to the foreign policy of its host. The investigations by the American attorneys general are still ongoing. They are digging through the emails and the pricing algorithms, trying to find the point where dynamic pricing becomes fraud. But for many, the verdict is already in. The 2026 World Cup will be remembered for the football, yes, but it will also be remembered for the people who weren't there. It will be remembered for the Somali official who watched the games on a television in a Mogadishu airport. It will be remembered for the South African players who felt like intruders in their own competition. Football has always been a game of movement. The ball moves, the players run, and the fans travel. When you stop the movement, you kill the game. The 48-team expansion was supposed to open the doors wider than ever before. Instead, those doors were fitted with biometric scanners and price tags that most of the world could never afford. The united bid had ended up dividing the footballing world more deeply than any single nation host ever could. There is a quiet sadness in seeing a stadium in New Jersey filled with people who can afford a $10,000 ticket, while the true heart of the sport is kept outside by a visa bond. It is a specific kind of grief to realize that the most popular sport on earth has been successfully partitioned. The pushback from France, the UK, and South Africa might not have resulted in a total boycott this time, but it has changed the conversation forever. National federations are now looking at their contracts with FIFA with a new level of scrutiny. They are asking for travel guarantees. They are asking for pricing caps. They are asking for the right to exist in the host country without being treated like a security threat. The 2026 final will eventually end. A trophy will be lifted in New Jersey. The confetti will be swept away, and the stadiums will return to hosting NFL games and concerts. FIFA will declare the tournament a massive success, citing the record-breaking revenue and the television ratings. They will talk about the growth of the game in North America. But in the boardrooms of the European and African federations, the tone will be different. They will remember the 2026 World Cup as the year the tournament lost its immunity. They will remember it as the moment the host nation's laws became more powerful than the laws of the game. The future of the World Cup is now inseparable from the politics of its hosts. The era of the neutral tournament is over. We are entering an age where your ability to support your country depends entirely on your country's relationship with the host's State Department. It is a bleak realization for a sport that once claimed to transcend borders. As the sun sets over the training camps and the luxury hotels of this tournament, the image that remains isn't a goal or a save. It is the image of that South African plane, sitting on the tarmac in the heat of Johannesburg. It is the image of a team ready to play, waiting for a permission that shouldn't have been necessary. It is the image of a world that was invited to a party and then told it couldn't come inside. The 2026 World Cup has proven that you can build the biggest stadiums in the world and still not have enough room for everyone. The question that remains is whether the sport can ever truly be global again, or if it has finally been priced and policed out of reach. We are watching the end of an era. The game is still there, but the world is being left behind. The stadiums are glowing tonight. Outside, the world is waiting. Is anyone actually listening? Football is no longer just football.